Amidst all the player turnover and transfer portal mayhem, Iowa State football's ability to keep players home while unorthodox might be the key to success at the safety position this upcoming season. We're talking about it today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day, making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Whatever you're watching or listening on, be sure to hit subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're breaking down some more football, a little bit of media availability from not only Deion Broomfield and the cornerbacks, but Ryan Clanton and the offensive line. I cannot wait to dive into what they had to say, especially on the offensive line side of things. So stick around for that second segment. Then in the third segment, we're going to kind of touch our toe into the water of maybe the player roster size, or I suppose the school roster size, whatever it is, and what that might look like moving forward. Before we get that far, though, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And there's a lot going on in the football verse, in the football universe, as they say. But let's dive right into Deion Broomfield and what he had to say about the safeties, not only from last year, but this upcoming year. Obviously, a lot of names kind of leaving. Beau Freyler, kind of the big name. And with Beau Freyler and his absence kind of for the second half of that Pop-Tart Bowl game, and then obviously no longer with the program, Marcus Neal's name came up quite a few times in this presser. And so we don't need to dive right into Marcus Neal right now, but just know that it is something that will kind of be a big deal, it seems. The way I see it, the amount of times he was mentioned, it's like there's something here. There is definitely, like, they like Marcus Neal. They really do, over there in I don't know what the performance center, I think it's the Stark Performance Center. Feels like Tony Stark, but I don't know if that's right. Nonetheless, let's talk a little bit about the situation as a whole. Broomfield kind of said that right now, like, there's not really a clear starter. So you could be doing some reps with the ones, then next time out, you're out with the threes, just kind of building a competitive environment, which is, I think, really good. And I think they felt the same way. Don't guarantee any spots right now. Like, you got to go out and prove it. You got to show that you are the true number one guy. You got to go out and show that you are very capable of being that number two guy. You got to show that while you have, like, what you're going to see is you're going to see guys that have the upside but can't maintain the consistency. So maybe you're a 3 or a 4 guy. Like, that ability to go out and maintain high level play will be on display during this spring practice, 15 practice ordeal. And then obviously through the summer as we near Ireland, actually, not even, it's week 0, Ireland. And I love that. I love that it's like just that environment that creates, the amount of competition. And Coach Broomfield talked about, like, it's, you got to know, like, you got to go out and turn it on. Like, this is go time. And so that, in my opinion, that elevates the play of everybody, because if you have guys that are pretty sure they're going to be starters or know they're going to be starters, then they can kind of like take plays or moments off. And you don't want that mentality, especially in the spring. I mean, if there's any time, you just don't want it this early. If that bug gets in the ear this far out, like, that can spread to like wildfire status. Like, it's just boom, 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 boom. All of a sudden now everybody's taking off plays. Everybody, you can't have that in the culture. And so I do think that this right here, it might feel like you're a 1, but when you're out there practicing with the threes, you're gonna do a little bit of like, I got to turn it on. I don't want to be practicing with the threes right now. I got to get up where they're only playing me with the ones. And so I do like that side of things. Other than that, there was just a kind of a mentioning of a couple players, some guys, especially young guys, that we need to look out for. Josh Patterson will be an early enrollee. He's out there with them now. Ethan Stecker and LaMarcus Hicks will both be coming, I believe, in the summer. They're not up there now, but a couple young guys that Iowa State was able to snag, and they do have kind of high hopes for at the safety, DB, kind of wherever they end up falling position. And then that Marcus Neal. And Marcus Neal is very interesting because they talked about what he did last year. And I did pull up kind of his games, his statistics. Really played in 5 games: West Virginia, Texas Tech, Kansas, Cincinnati, and Miami. Obviously, Miami and the Pop-Tart Bowl, kind of playing a pretty fair share of that one. Ended up with 8 tackles, 3 solos, and 5 assists. That was his strongest game. His next best game I would say probably be the Texas Tech game. 2 tackles, 2 solos. So 2 total, both of them being solos. That's obviously relatively promising. Did force a fumble in that Texas Tech game as well. No interceptions on the year. And when they were kind of talking about Neal, they were basically saying like, he's got all the physicals, and that's what you really kind of need to start out with. You can't have a guy that it's not really quite there physically. If it's there physically but not there mentally, you can work with that a lot more, is kind of what they were conveying. And so that was kind of what it seemed like, is that Marcus Neal is going to need to develop the mental side moving forward ahead of Ireland. Like, can we get him to identify on, this portion, when you see this, do this right here, get to this position, this is your assignment, and to get to that automatic level of play, because you can't be thinking when you're in the secondary. You just can't. You're going to get cooked. You have to be acting on instinct. You have to be acting under like basically automation mode, and you're like a ball hawk or reading maybe like a hip or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you're not thinking about it, right? You're just doing on some level, because it's a reactionary position. The offense knows what they're doing. You don't. You are trying to either figure it out, or at the very least just cover where they are and where they're going to be, which you don't know. So it's a very tough position. And so that's what Broomfield was talking about with this whole football school is what we'll call it. I don't know if they have a better name for it, but I do think this is really interesting. They've talked about this in the past, and it's something that seems to keep coming up. So I'm going to kind of mention it here. They talk about how they bring these guys in for like these school sessions, and he's like, some days it'll be formations. These are all the offensive formations. Some days it'll be motions. Like, these are all of the motions that you can see and how it will impact, like, and he didn't go this in depth, but I'm sure it's like, this is how it would affect if we were running this, if we were running more of a man style, like a Tampa 2, if we're running cover 2 high, 1 high shell, whatever the case might be, with some man underneath, if you're splitting the field, half zone, half man. I don't know exactly what their defensive package looks like, although I would love to get my hands on that playbook just from a nerd standpoint. Like, that would be really, really cool. But I'm sure that they're talking about, internally, like, this is how you go about this. So that way, when they get out on the field, they don't have to talk about it. And so he said, like, we peel it back as far as we can. He kept saying, like, peeling it back, and all I could think of was the Shrek and the ogre whole thing. Like, ogres have layers. That's all I could think of. So if you want, if that helps you, that's where my mind went. But he kind of talked about, like, it's all of this to do. All of this school is for a goal, right? They're not doing it for no reason. And really what they're trying to do is to get the players to be able to get the call, whatever the defensive play call is, identify the formation, and then kind of move to that position wherever they need to be, the depth and the width, right? So how far over top the tight end are you? Are you kind of sneaking outside shade there? If you're over the slot, are you going to be pressed? Are you going to be 6 yards, 7 yards, 8 yards deep? Although it might seem like minute, the difference between 6 and 7 yards, and definitely between 6 and 8 yards, huge difference. Going to play a huge role in how that play plays out. So understanding exactly where they need to be at starting, and then how to deal with motions and how to deal with an audible, if that's what's happening, like whatever the case might be, getting those guys to autopilot is exactly what they need to be doing. And so that football school is really, really neat. And then they kind of talked on this a little bit here. Last point. He said, like, we've had guys that haven't really been starters, but they've been in the scheme and in this defense. And the question is now, can they play at that level now that they've seen the guys do it the past few years? And that's awesome. I love this because, it's just from the inside, it's like that promote from within kind of deal. I do think that having experience in a system and knowing how a university or program runs is integral to success on some level. Granted, that's not necessarily always the case, but I do think that understanding how things work from the inside, like a very deep understanding, is pivotal. And so that was really nice to hear. He's like, we might not have a ton of guys with a ton of reps right now, per se, but we do have guys who know the ins and the outs. And that's what we need to hear, not only from the defensive back position, but also, or I guess safeties as well, but from the offensive line position. That's a big deal. And it seems like that might be the case. We're going to have to talk about it more coming up right after this. There's nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last minute MLB showdown or soaking in the excitement of an NBA matchup. But finding great seats at a great price, that used to be a challenge until I found Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer. And with their all in pricing, you see the total cost up front, no surprises at checkout. There's a couple reasons why I love Game Time. The priority last minute deals, save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports. I mean, that's amazing. Concerts, yeah, comedy, theater, whatever you could possibly think of. The peace of mind that it brings with seat views before you buy and no surprise fees, a lowest price guarantee. I mean, you don't have to worry about it at all. You can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So we talked about the defensive backs and safeties, that whole deal. Very exciting. I'm not gonna lie. I am kind of amped up. Here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Big fan of football. I'm not gonna lie. We were watching these pressers here, and down in the corner there was like football highlights going, and I was just like, I'm getting juiced. I cannot wait until we see the pads and the helmets flying around with the tight jerseys and the deep balls and the big hits. Like, it's gonna be awesome. But all that high flying action, all of that highlight reel type of football that I was seeing down in the corner, that's only half the puzzle. That's only the flashy stuff. The offensive line is where games are won and lost, in my opinion. Really, it's the trenches in general, offensive and defensive lines. But let's kind of narrow in on the offensive line for Iowa State with Ryan Clanton, Coach Ryan Clanton, stepping up to the podium. And I'm not going to lie, this guy might be my favorite coach of all time. This dude, through and through, amazing. First off, I'd like to mention he was wearing a Rocco Beck hat, okay, with the RB logo, which is really sick. Might have to get one of those myself. And so then I was like looking through some other things, and Tyler Miller actually also wore a Flow like Rocco shirt. And so then they were kind of talking about like how much you have to love your quarterback. And like right here, he says, it's a very tight knit room, but the way that they love Rocco, like if you don't love your quarterback and your running backs like that much, you're either not a good O-line coach or not a good O-line. And so you could see how much this line not only works together, but loves those that they're working for, loves protecting Rocco, loves obviously the tight end and the running back positions that they're kind of not as much the tight end because it's they're kind of a pseudo offensive lineman, but like the running backs that they're blocking for on run plays, whether it's Carson Hansen or Abu or whoever it might be. But I just wanted to get that out of the way because it was something I noticed later in, and I was like, that looks like a Rocco Beck hat. Boom, it was. Tyler Miller wearing the Flow like Rocco shirt. Boom. They are sending a very clear message. Rocco's our guy. A couple things that we got to touch on here. There was, obviously some names thrown around. I did love the way that Coach Clanton introduced these guys like Burr, dog, Barrett, dog, Garrett Rutledge will run through somebody's face. Brendan Black, freight train. Like that is awesome. That is amazing. And so just some names to throw out there. Obviously, guys, we don't know exactly what the offensive line is going to look like, who's doing what, where. Still very early. There's just a lot of potential moves that could be made is really the best way to put that. And so we don't have to dive too deep into who's doing what, just because there is a lot of question marks at this point. But he talked about like a lot of returners. That means a lot of competition, which is very good. Same thing with like the safeties that we talked about. And he talked a little bit about his progression of like being a coach at Iowa State over the last 3 years. And we're kind of to the point where like last season we saw a lot of guys like 7 linemen on the field kind of deal with the simplified offense. They were guys playing tight end and moving around. And so he does kind of like where they're at now with guys knowing the offense. And we've seen linemen talk about like, hey, when I played tight end, it just gives you this whole extra level of knowing the offense, because not only do you need to know all of the run plays and who you're blocking and against what defensive fronts and schemes, how does that change your assignment, but also now you need to know all of the route patterns. Not only yours, you also need to know like where is everyone else at and how does that attack a zone coverage? Where do I need to sit on this hook curl or whatever the case might be? Obviously, if you're running a corner, you're probably not going to sit. It'd be pretty confusing for coach. For Rocco back there. Kind of a coach, actually, the way that they were talking about him in his level of leadership. But nonetheless, they kind of talked about that a little bit. And so Clanton, Coach Clanton was kind of talking about like these guys are starting to get to the point where they know the playbook so well that they could teach other guys the playbook, which is really, really important. And now, like they are so tight knit, they're all like this in the locker room, right? Like if you're not watching, I'm kind of doing like a trap strong signal here. Everyone's like super, super tight knit, and then they can go out on the field and they can just pin their ears back. And he said roll their eyes back, but that's like kind of a shark analogy there, and just go. They can just fly around and make plays. And he's also talked about like this offensive line group right now is just like aggressive. He kind of talked about like let's go here first. There's things that he wanted to see that this offensive line group would do this season to make it a successful year, eliminating errors, mental errors specifically. But then he mentioned this, and this is where I was going with the pinning of the ears. The ability to play within the rules, but also like taking it to the edge. Like we got to toe that line a little bit physically and really assert dominance. Like the offensive line is where the kind of the tone is set for the game. And so he's like, that's kind of our identity. That's kind of what we got to do. And so far this year, like we haven't had to ask them to work harder, be more violent, run faster, hit harder, which is great news. And the way that he talks about this group is like so positive and so glowing that I can't help but like think we might have the best offensive line in the Big 12. Now, I know that last year was not necessarily the best offensive line play probably the Iowa State's ever seen. We had some it was good. It certainly was good, but run game was not perfect. Obviously, the defensive line, I think, was a much bigger problem than the offensive line. And the offensive line really did do a solid job of keeping Rocco protected for the most part. But I do think that there were a few things, small, but a few things that we can improve on. And I think that's what they're looking at for this year. Like this is a group that we can really kind of set the tone, and that was kind of what they were conveying through. Like we might be really solid at offensive line. Yeah, they're obviously you're losing Jalen Travis and Hufford, but like Jared Hufford, but like we're gonna be fine. They're gonna be hard to replace. Those are kind of freaks. He did say like Jalen Travis is not from this planet, not from Earth. And whenever you have an alien like that, it is going to be tough to replace. But when you've got a freight train 2 dogs and a guy who's willing to run through somebody's face, I think we're going to be okay. And that's only a few of the guys. Obviously couldn't touch on literally every single one. I just love the way that this offensive line group is being talked about. Not more on that level than like who's doing what position. Like I'm more worried at this point in the season of like what are the vibes kind of around each position group. And there are some groups that I've talked about, and it's like we're not looking as high of vibes as I would have liked. Like there's some question marks, legitimate. You can feel it in the way that the questions are answered. This one, I felt like Coach Clanton's got it clamped. Like we are going to be okay at the offensive line position. And so I guess only time will tell. But the way things seem to be rolling, we're going to be okay. Rocco is going to be protected. He's going to have time. And they talked about like he's very good at knowing the offense, getting the ball out on time. Like Rocco's doing his part. We need to do ours. And I do think that that will happen. I don't think Iowa State's offensive line is high on my areas of concern for this upcoming season. Honestly, I think it will be okay. Speaking of areas of concern, the roster size, something that's been tossed around. We got to talk about this because this is very, very interesting coming up right after this. Okay. Full transparency here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am not a lawyer. Let's just get that out in the open. So everything I'm about to say is just my interpretation of reportings on something with the law. So just to make that very, very clear, this is my interpretation. I'm observing and reporting here. Just literally what I'm reading and then my interpretation of that. And if it's way off base, that's because I'm not a lawyer, probably. So there's this whole House versus NCAA thing going on. Big deal yesterday. And it was not settled. So nothing right now is kind of imminent, it feels like. I guess they're meeting today to get some things done or talk about some things. But the one of the big things that I noticed coming out of this, and Ross Dellinger did a wonderful job tweeting about all this. It's just that a lot of the words like were confusing to me, but this one kind of made sense. Um, he talked about how, Judge Wilkin is, I guess, willing to make a settlement or something if they make some kind of tweaks to what they're presenting, I guess. One of those being that the roster limits need a phase in. And so, like I said, a lot of this does not make sense to me. I wish I had passed the bar at this point. Kim Kardashian has, and I haven't. So I don't know how I feel about that. But nonetheless, it seems like she's not a big fan of this hard, just now all of a sudden we've got a roster limit. And if you can't get below that, like you just got to start cutting people and figure it out. And that's not great. That's not a great look. And so it seems like she's like, hey, we can phase this in. We can potentially grandfather some people in here. Let's figure out a way to get this done. And I do think, that's what I'm going to act under. Okay, that's the assumption I've made. That's what we're going to talk about here. It seems like we might be able to have higher roster limits for a few years. And then, maybe in 3-4 years, we're looking at a much lower roster limit. Now, like I said, I could completely be misinterpreting this. This could be more related to scholarships or something along those lines. And I greatly apologize if I'm incorrect. But from what I understand, we could be having more roster positions. And I think that this is amazing for Iowa State football because Iowa State was so banged up last year, so injured that to me, the way I am looking at this is like we got like almost a whole new recruiting class back, but only from injuries. Like we just got so much more depth without bringing in, which we did do as well, but without bringing in like transfer guys, without bringing in new freshmen, we just added a ton of depth from guys that are no longer hurt or injured. Or rehabbing or whatever the case might be for them individually. Then you also bring in the transfers and you bring in the freshmen. And you just, to me, it's like now we might be stacked. Like we might be in a great spot here. But then you look at all the roster cuts they have to make, and it's like now you're in a really dicey position. Who do you cut? I mean, that whole thing is a very tricky question because those are guys that like committed to playing at Iowa State, and you tell them all these things, and then you tell them, oh, actually, you know what? We're not going to continue with you. Like, we are moving so close to professional sports. It's wild. But nonetheless, if this is true, from my understanding, and the rosters can be a little bit larger for longer, and then you can kind of, I guess, plan your recruiting and transfer portal strategies over the next few years to not actually like cut players. I love that, first off. And secondly, for this team, I think it's vital. It's huge. Ton of guys coming back from injury last year. Obviously, Bacon being one of those guys that was like, I think Iowa State would have been better if Bacon played. Like, are you kidding me? That's a name that we've thrown around all year long. But also, plenty of other guys, especially at the linebacker position, especially at the tight end position. Like Iowa State really is poised to make a deep, I think, run with the depth that they now have. Now, granted, you have to keep the players healthy this year as well. Just because they make the comeback doesn't mean that they are like completely good to go. Like, obviously, it's going to be tough to play through after a rehab situation. Like, I understand that. But like Caleb Aiken, Carson Willick, John Klosterman, Will McLaughlin, Cale Brazina, Zachary Lovett, like these are big names. And that's a lot of games missed as well. And so I do think that this is I think this is a very good thing. If this goes through, Iowa State having that much more depth, I think will significantly, I mean, I can't even hardly put it into words. Like if you had to cut that down, I don't even know what we're at, granted. By my count, I'm looking at about 118, and then the freshmen will come in, I guess, is roughly, not including the early enrollees. The early enrollees are in this 118, and then the freshmen will come in and bump that number up. And so you got to cut what, like 20 guys? That's not great. Like, who is being cut? Are you going to cut all the freshmen? I don't think that's probably a smart move. So you're cutting your depth. Like, you know what I mean? That's just a dicey situation to find yourself in. And so the way that this roster is constructed at this moment in time, now granted, everyone is going to benefit from having more players on the roster. Like, I understand that everybody's going to have more depth. Like, that's a no-brainer. The reason I'm saying that this is more impactful for Iowa State is because the guys they're getting back are all like coming off of injury. They're high-level players that just didn't get to see the field last year. And it will impact the depth more substantially, in my opinion, than what we will see from some other schools. Now, granted, like transfers going to play a role in some other schools, and I think obviously it will at Iowa State as well. I don't believe Tamatoa is actually included in that 118 list because he's coming after this spring semester from Yale. But it's just this to me. I read that and I immediately thought Iowa State will benefit from this very much so. Like this is a big deal to get. Like you're just cutting a lot of depth. That's really what it comes down to. If you're cutting down to that, I don't know if it was like a 105 mark or roughly. Like you're going to lose either young talent or depth. And then that also impacts you down the road, which that's like, if it probably will get passed, right? Like the lowering of that number. I don't even know, like I said, with that whole courtroom, it's kind of scary. But down the line, it will impact. Like you're not going to find as many walk-on guys that turn out to be like a JJ Watt, but at least for now, at this moment in time, I think Iowa State will be okay, and you can still develop these guys for another year and have that depth. That's a win-win to me. And so let me know down below, I guess, if you feel like differently. I feel like that's a win. I don't even, just in general, I feel like that's a huge win. But maybe you don't feel the same way. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. I read all the comments. So if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you doing? Obviously, we're trying to prove it's a Cyclone State here, so got to help out with that. With that being said, until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.